We have all been sold the same promise: work hard enough, grind long enough, and you can climb out of poverty and build something real. To put that promise to the test, a millionaire entrepreneur named Mike Black voluntarily made himself homeless. He surrendered his money, his car, his home, and every business contact he had, then set out to build a $1 million business from scratch in just 12 months. Nothing but grit and a smartphone. He wanted to prove that anyone with enough determination could bootstrap their way out of nothing. Halfway across the world in Hong Kong, a hit television show called Rich Mate, Poor Mate ran a nearly identical experiment. They stripped billionaire CEOs and political elites of their wealth and forced them to survive as street cleaners and manual laborers.
Four educated, well-off persons go sleeping on the streets, collecting garbage, living in a cramped cubicle, and scavenging for cardboard boxes.
What happened, you ask? Did they achieve their goal? Both experiments ended in catastrophic failure. Mike Black's experiment collapsed prematurely because of severe health problems. In 10 months, he did earn $64,000, but the physical cost was 2 autoimmune diseases and a hip tumor. The effort broke his body. If a millionaire with deep business knowledge and decades of experience still destroys his health just trying to survive the bottom rung, what does that mean for someone starting with zero experience and zero runway? The Hong Kong experiment told the same story. Erwin Huang, a top jewelry executive, nearly passed out from the smell of garbage he was assigned to haul and threatened to quit after just a few hours because the physical damage was immediate and overwhelming. These men did not simply fail to get rich, their bodies gave out before they could even begin to try. So, if hard work is not the secret to wealth, what is? In this video, we are going to completely dismantle the myth of the bootstrap economy. We will show you exactly why the idea that hard work equals wealth is not just incomplete, but measurably false. We will replace that myth with the actual mathematics and biology of the poverty trap, exposing the ghetto tax that makes it literally more expensive to be poor, the welfare cliff that punishes people for trying to earn more, and the macroeconomic forces quietly designed to transfer the value of your labor upward to an asset-owning class. Why do millionaires fail when they try to bootstrap their way up from nothing? When you strip away the rhetoric, it comes down to two things: biology and structural support. Think of wealth creation like running a marathon. The middle class runs it with a support team handing them water at every mile. The poor run the same course while carrying a 50-pound backpack on an empty stomach. Critics of Mike Black's experiment made a fair point that experiments where wealthy people pretend to be poor can never fully capture the real weight of poverty, because the person always carries an invisible psychological safety net. They know at some level they can quit at any time, and yet even with that net, Black's body still collapsed. At the extreme end of the poverty spectrum, a lack of basic nutrition mathematically guarantees a downward spiral. Economists call this the S-curve. Think of it like a smartphone battery stuck at 1%. Without enough calories or safe sleep to charge past that level, the system shuts down before you can even open the apps you would need to make money. It is not a lack of ambition, it is a biological power failure. When your entire focus is on finding a place to sleep and enough food to function, any capacity for long-term planning simply evaporates. Financial shock can physically alter cognitive function and trigger depression, stripping away the mental space needed for any kind of financial strategy. In a landmark 2013 study published in Science, researchers Anandi Mani, Sendil Mullainathan, Eldar Shafir, and Jiaying Zhao demonstrated that poverty itself, not stress, not poor education, not genetics, directly reduces cognitive performance. In one experiment, they induced financial worries in both lower income and higher income participants and then measured their performance on standard cognitive tests. The results were stark. Poor participants who were prompted to think about financial problems showed a significant drop in IQ equivalent performance, roughly 13 points, equivalent to losing an entire night's sleep. The well-off participants showed virtually no effect. The same financial concern was cognitively devastating for one group and essentially irrelevant to the other. But their second study is even harder to dismiss. The team tracked Indian sugarcane farmers, the same individuals, before and after the annual harvest. Pre-harvest, the farmers were effectively poor. Post-harvest, with income received, they were measurably better off. The researchers tested the same person in both states. The same farmer, with the same education, same genetics, same personality, performed measurably worse on cognitive tasks when poor than when not. And critically, this could not be explained by differences in nutrition, workload, or stress levels. The researchers concluded that poverty itself consumes cognitive bandwidth, leaving less mental capacity for everything else. including the kind of long-term planning and deliberate decision-making that financial advancement requires. Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir expanded this framework further in related work describing what they call bandwidth. When the brain is preoccupied with financial scarcity, it defaults to fast, automatic thinking, what psychologists call System 1, and disengages the slower, more deliberate System 2 reasoning that governs careful financial decisions, impulse control, and planning. Poverty, in other words, is not just an economic condition. It is a cognitive tax, and it is levied every single day, even if you push past all of that, past the biology, past the bureaucracy, past the measurable toll on the brain itself. The financial system is mathematically rigged to drain your resources faster than a wealthy person's. How does having less money force you to spend more? Author Terry Pratchett captured this perfectly with something he called the boots theory. A rich man buys a $50 pair of boots that lasts 10 years. A poor man can only afford $10 boots that leak after one season, spending $100 over the same decade and still ending up with wet feet. The rich man comes out ahead by $150, not because he worked harder, but simply because he had $50 to spend upfront. This is not just a clever metaphor, it is a structural reality economists call the poverty tax. Because limited cash flow prevents low-income people from buying in bulk, they pay significantly higher per-unit costs on everyday necessities. A bulk box of diapers at a warehouse store costs about 21 cents per diaper. The same product at a corner store, bought in a small pack by a family that cannot afford the bulk option, costs 64 cents per diaper, more than 3 times the price for exactly the same thing. Living in an impoverished neighborhood often means living in a food desert, which layers on another poverty tax. Without access to large grocery stores, people are forced to shop at convenience stores with dramatic markups. A box of cereal costing $4.82 at a supermarket costs $7.41 at a corner store, a 54% markup for the simple fact of living in the wrong zip code. The same logic applies to housing and transportation. Without the upfront capital for a standard lease security deposit, first and last month's rent, low-income individuals are frequently pushed into short-term rentals and weekly motels that cost far more on a monthly basis. And if they own a car, insurance algorithms using credit scores and zip codes charge them more for the same coverage as a wealthier driver with an identical driving record. The financial industry prices the working class as a risk category. When cash is completely exhausted, predatory alternatives, rent-to-own furniture, payday loans, become the only option for the unbanked. These products extract billions in fees annually from people who lack any access to traditional banking. You often hear that poor people just need to budget better. But budgeting is a tool for managing surplus. When every dollar of income is consumed by marked-up necessities, there is no surplus to manage. And when a low-income worker does manage to push through, work overtime and earn a raise, that is when they collide with the system's most deliberately cruel design. Section 3. Would a rational person turn down a promotion? Here is how it works in practice. Say you are working a full-time job, earning just enough to qualify for Medicaid, the government health insurance that covers low-income Americans. Your employer offers you a promotion, a modest raise, maybe an extra $1 or $2 per hour. On paper, that sounds like exactly the kind of upward movement the system is supposed to reward. But there is a problem. That raise pushes your income slightly above the Medicaid eligibility threshold. And the moment it does, you lose your coverage entirely, not gradually, not partially, gone. This is what economists call the welfare cliff. And cliff is exactly the right word. It is not a gentle slope where benefits phase out as income rises. It is a sudden drop. One small step forward in income triggers a catastrophic fall in total resources. Rigid benefit thresholds create a trap where a small income increase causes the loss of critical support worth far more than the raise itself. Now consider this scenario. You are diabetic. Your insulin, without insurance, costs $90,000 a year out of pocket. Your raise is worth maybe $2,000 a year. Taking that promotion does not make you better off. It puts you $88,000 in the hole. You are not being lazy. You are not lacking ambition. You are doing the math, and the math says stay poor or risk your life. In 2019, the Kaiser Family Foundation reported that the average annual premium for employer-sponsored family health coverage in the United States was $21,343, with employees paying $5,547 of that out of pocket. For an individual, the average premium was $7,470, with employees paying $5,547 of that out of pocket. For an individual, the average premium was $7,470, with employees paying $1,242. These are not optional expenses. They are survival costs. Advanced economic models describe an asset threshold called the Macabre frontier. a level below which saving money is not just difficult, but mathematically irrational. Think about what that actually means in practice. Imagine someone working 2 jobs, skipping vacations, cutting every corner they can find. After 6 months of that, they have managed to save $1,200. That is not a small thing. For a household living paycheck to paycheck, $1,200 is the result of extraordinary discipline and sacrifice. It represents a safety net, a buffer. The first real evidence that the system might be beatable after all. Then suddenly, the car breaks down, the car that they desperately need to get to work to keep their jobs. The cheapest car that they could afford, but is prone to breaking down more frequently than a new car. Not a catastrophic failure, just a busted alternator. Standard repair. The mechanic quotes $900, and just like that, 6 months of sacrifice is reduced to $300. They are not back to zero. They are close enough to zero that the difference does not matter. And then 3 weeks later, their child gets an ear infection. A single urgent care visit without insurance runs between $150 and $300. Now they are at zero, or below it. This is not a hypothetical edge case. According to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, roughly 40% of Americans cannot cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing money or selling something. $400. Not a car repair, not a hospital stay. $400. The macabre frontier is the name economists give to the invisible line below which every attempt to save is essentially a game you are statistically guaranteed to lose. Every dollar you set aside is hostage to the next emergency, and emergencies do not schedule themselves around your savings goals. Below that threshold, the rational financial decision, the mathematically correct one, is not to try. Because trying and failing over and over costs more than it saves. In time, in hope, and in the compounding psychological toll of watching your progress erased on a timeline you cannot control. This is not a character flaw. It is a structural trap with a name, a model, and decades of data behind it. Cash flow is not the only resource the working class has capped. Time itself is rationed. Section 4. Time poverty. How does a lack of free time keep your bank account empty? 5 in the morning. An alarm cuts through the dark. You skip breakfast, rush out the door, work a full shift, come home, clean, cook, and collapse at midnight. You may have a job, but if every waking hour is consumed by survival, you are not building anything. You are time poor. The top 1% use capital to buy time back. Personal assistants, nannies, private transport. The 99% sell their time at a discount, then spend whatever remains on domestic survival. A chronic lack of discretionary time impairs cognitive bandwidth and locks in the cycle of poverty, because 0 free hours means 0 space for skill building, professional development, or financial planning. Now here is the part that rarely gets said out loud. The time the working class spends on domestic survival is not just exhausting, it is economically worthless, not in a moral sense, but in a financial one. The meal you cook at home does not increase your earning power. The groceries you spend 2 hours sourcing, comparing prices on and hauling back, do not build toward a raise. The laundry, the cleaning, the errands, none of it compounds, none of it accumulates. You spend the time and then it is gone. Think about what that time could otherwise represent. A Harvard Business School study found that workers who invested as little as 1 hour per day in deliberate skill development, online courses, professional certifications, industry reading, saw measurable career advancement within 12 to 18 months. An hour a day. That is it. But an hour a day of focused skill building requires having an hour a day available. And for a low-income worker who spends 2 hours commuting on public transit, another hour on grocery shopping because they have no car, and another hour cooking from scratch because they cannot afford delivery or meal prep services, that hour does not exist. It was already spent. This is the opportunity cost that never shows up in economic statistics. We measure what people earn. We rarely measure what they could have earned if the hours they spent surviving had been spent building. For a single person in their 20s, this is brutal, but it is survivable. You are at least building your own schedule around your own needs. You have some margin to experiment, to stay late at a job that offers growth, to take a night class, to spend a Sunday afternoon on something other than immediate survival. But the moment you have children, that margin closes, and for low-income parents, it effectively disappears entirely. A child does not care that you are exhausted. A child does not defer their needs until after you have had time to study for a certification exam. When a toddler is sick in the middle of the night, the parent is up. when school pickup is at 3 and your shift ends at 4, something has to give, and it is usually the job or the sleep or both. A 2019 report from the Urban Institute found that nearly 1 in 3 low-income parents reported cutting work hours or leaving jobs entirely due to childcare failures. Not by choice, but because no affordable alternative existed. The average cost of center-based childcare in the United States now exceeds the average cost of in-state college tuition in most states. For a household earning $40,000 a year, spending $15,000 to $20,000 on childcare is not a line item. It is the end of the budget. So the time equation for low-income parents is not just tight. It is a zero-sum game where every hour is already promised to something that cannot wait. Feed the child, get them to school, pick them up, keep them safe, put them to bed, start again. Any time left over, if any exists, goes to the household tasks the parent also carries. And somewhere in that schedule, there is supposed to be a career. Being time poor also blocks access to healthcare. Skipping or delaying routine medical care transforms minor preventable problems into catastrophic emergencies, which then consume even more time and money to address. A low-income parent who cannot take a half-day off work to see a doctor for a persistent cough will not see that doctor until the cough becomes pneumonia and the emergency room becomes unavoidable at 10 times the cost and with recovery time that a salaried worker with paid sick leave can absorb, but a shift worker simply cannot. The burden is not evenly shared. Globally, women carry a massively disproportionate share of unpaid domestic labor. Cooking, cleaning, caregiving, spending 4 to 5 more hours per day on unpaid work than men. That time cannot be recovered. It cannot be invested. And for low-income mothers in particular, it means working a second full-time job that pays nothing, advances nothing, and is recognized by virtually no economic measure in existence. If your every waking hour is spoken for before you even consider your future, not because you lack ambition, but because the hours are structurally committed to keeping people alive, then the question is not why low-income workers fail to invest in themselves. The question is when exactly they were supposed to find the time. Which raises the obvious question. If the working class is producing more economic value than at any point in history, where is all of that wealth actually going? Section 5. The productivity illusion. If we are producing more wealth than ever, why is the working class getting poorer? Imagine a pie that doubles in size every single year. Instead of each person getting a larger slice over time, your slice stays the same size, while the owner of the bakery takes 100% of all the new growth. That is not a metaphor. That is the data. Since 1979, the growth in US worker compensation has dramatically lagged behind the growth in net economic productivity. Here is what that looks like in concrete terms. If average wages had simply kept pace with productivity since 1979, workers today would be earning $9 more per hour. That value is being created. It is simply not going to the people creating it. The share of national income flowing to workers has dropped to historic lows, shifting massive wealth toward investors and business owners. The decades-long collapse of union representation has directly eroded workers' ability to claim a fair share of the value they produce. The wealth did not vanish. Corporate profits nearly doubled their share of GDP, absorbing the capital that would historically have gone to wages. Meanwhile, CEO compensation at the top 350 US firms has grown by over 1,000% since 1978. Not because CEOs became 1,000% more effective. In fact, more than 100% of recent CEO pay growth comes entirely from stock awards. They are not being compensated for building better products. They are being compensated for inflating asset values. And what do the ultra-wealthy do with a disproportionate share of a doubling pie? They buy the one finite thing every human being needs to survive. So here is what actually happened to that $9 an hour. It did not disappear. It was not lost to some abstract economic force. It was captured, converted into profit, awarded as stock, and then deployed as purchasing power into a single category of asset that every working person also needs to buy. That $9 became someone else's down payment to buy a house. And the more of it that flows upward, the harder it becomes for anyone below to get a foot in the door. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and arguably the most consequential one. Because even if you somehow navigate the biological wall, outlast the poverty tax, sidestep the welfare cliff, and claw back enough time to build something, there is a macroeconomic force quietly working against you that no amount of individual effort can overcome. Section 6. The real inflation. Why does housing keep getting less affordable, no matter how hard you work? Inflation is usually measured through the consumer price index, the cost of everyday goods like groceries. But that measure misses the real crisis: asset price inflation. The wealthy are not competing in the same economic game as everyone else. While most people spend their lives trying to afford groceries, the wealthy are buying the land the grocery store stands on. Economic models show that as wealth concentrates at the top, surplus capital does not get spent on more groceries. It flows into finite assets: housing, land, equities. As inequality grows, this drives asset prices up far faster than the wages of ordinary workers, making ownership structurally out of reach. Asset inflation works like monopoly, where one player starts with millions, buys every property on the first turn, and a standing rule caps your salary increase at 2.5% forever. You do not lose because you played badly. You lose because the math is designed to guarantee it. Central banks actively target wage growth at around 2% to fight consumer price inflation, while largely ignoring asset price inflation that is pricing workers out of housing entirely. Workers are pressed from both directions. Wages suppressed by policy, the things they need to own inflating beyond reach. There is also a fundamental legal paradox in how we treat wealth. Intellectual property, patents, copyrights, eventually expires. It enters the public domain. But physical land and real property can be hoarded indefinitely, passed down through generations with no expiration. This allows concentrated wealth to endlessly accumulate finite land, permanently pricing working-class families out of ownership long after the original buyers are dead. When you put biology, mathematics, and macroeconomic policy together, poverty stops looking like a failure of work ethic. It starts looking like a calculated equation. Let us take stock of what we have actually established here. We started with a millionaire who voluntarily surrendered everything and still could not survive the bottom rung without his body giving out. We showed that the very act of being poor forces you to pay more for diapers, for cereal, for housing, for the basic cost of existing. We showed that the welfare system is designed, whether intentionally or not, with a cliff edge that makes accepting a raise financially irrational. We showed that time itself is a currency the poor are denied and that the unpaid labor burden compounds that deprivation further. We showed that decades of rising worker productivity have been captured almost entirely by corporate profit and executive stock awards. And we showed that the wealth flowing to the top does not stay in a bank account. It gets recycled into finite assets like housing, driving prices beyond the reach of everyone whose wages just got suppressed by the same central bank policy meant to keep the economy stable. Every single one of these forces operates simultaneously. They do not take turns, they compound. And this is the part that makes the meritocracy argument collapse under its own weight. Meritocracy, the idea that talent, effort, and determination are the primary drivers of economic outcomes, assumes a level playing field. But a level playing field does not tax you more for being at the bottom. It does not punish you for getting a raise. It does not steal your discretionary time, price you out of nutrition, block you from shelter with bureaucratic ID requirements, or redirect the value of your labor into someone else's property portfolio. A true meritocracy would measure your output. What the current system measures is your starting position. Hard work matters. Nobody is arguing otherwise. But hard work is a multiplier. And if the base number is 0 or negative, no multiplier in the world gets you to wealth. The rungs on the ladder are real, but so is the mechanism that destroys them the moment you try to climb. So what would it actually take to change this? The honest answer is that no single policy fixes a system this interlocked. But economists and researchers have pointed to a cluster of structural interventions that could meaningfully move the needle. Graduated benefit phase-outs, where assistance tapers slowly as income rises rather than cutting off at a cliff edge, would eliminate the welfare trap without removing the safety net. Stronger collective bargaining protections and reformed labor law would begin to reconnect worker productivity with worker pay. Land value taxes, which levy the unimproved value of land rather than the buildings on it, discourage hoarding of finite real estate and incentivize productive use. Expanded access to childcare and early education would begin to close the time poverty gap, particularly for women carrying disproportionate unpaid domestic labor. And asset-based welfare policies, giving low-income individuals a meaningful ownership stake rather than only income support, could raise people above the Micawber frontier where saving becomes rational again. None of these are magic, none of them are politically frictionless. But they share a common thread. They treat the poverty trap as what it actually is, a structural engineering problem rather than a motivational one. The bootstrap story is compelling because it is simple: work hard, win. But the data does not tell that story. The data tells a story about compounding disadvantages, captured productivity, and a system of asset ownership that runs on rules written long before most of the people living under them were born. Understanding that is not an excuse to stop trying. It is a reason to stop blaming the wrong thing when trying is not enough. Now, I want to hear from you, because this video has laid out the data, the biology, the math, the policy design, but data does not exist in a vacuum, and neither do you. You are either living some version of this right now, you know someone who is, or you are starting to see the system differently than you did 20 minutes ago. So drop a comment, What is the piece of this that needs to be talked about more? The welfare cliff, the time trap, the fact that the same hour that could be a skill-building investment is already committed to survival before you even wake up. Tell me which part of this hit differently, and if you have lived it firsthand, say so. Those comments matter more than you know. If this video shifted something for you, share it. Not just for the algorithm, but because the people in your life who need to hear this argument are probably not going to stumble across it on their own. And if you want more videos that actually affect how people live, then please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. I intend to do this regularly and would love for you to be here for it. The real conversation is in the comments down below. I will see you there, and as always, thanks for watching.